The Arab shop owners of Jerusalem are asking the Israeli police to stop the Arab rioters. Iran is enriching uranium at 60%. How much higher are we going to let them go before they get a nuclear bomb? This and a whole lot more right here on the Joshua and Caleb Report.
In a world plagued with anti-Israel propaganda, Paul Yavel presents the Joshua and Caleb Report, a positive voice of truth straight from Israel's heartland.
In a world of negativity and fake news, every Christian should be connected to the life and positivity that Israel brings to the world. Guys, welcome back to the Joshua and Caleb Report. Luke, we got a lot to share today. Talk about a power-packed show. We've got a lot to cover. Before we do that, as always, guys, go ahead and subscribe. There's a lot of ways to do that. Luke, you're the pro at telling people how to do that. Ring bells and buttons.
Subscribe, ring the bell, leave a comment, leave us a like. Don't leave us a dislike or an unlike or whatever you call those thumbs down. We don't like those. No, you can if you want. But answered a lot of comments this week. Great to hear from you guys. So make sure you subscribe on YouTube because that's the best way to make sure you don't miss a show. And if you want to catch the other shows and other content like our articles that we have every single week, you got to go to joshuaandcaleb.com. And as a reminder, I don't know if we always mention this, everything we do is 100% free.
That's right.
And that's why it's so important for people to go support us on Patreon. It's patreon.com/Joshua and Caleb. And we had several people actually sign up this week. Amazing. Thank you guys so much for supporting the work. And like I said, because this YouTube channel, our other channels, all our content is 100% free, joining us either at a monthly or a one-time donation on Patreon is one of the ways that you can help support the show and keep great content coming out of Israel's biblical heartland. It's patreon.com/Joshua and Caleb. Make sure you go there and help us out.
Luke, we got a lot of big stuff going on with Ramadan right now. Ramadan is the Arab holiday that absolutely makes no sense to me because most of the time in holidays you eat and are like joyful and happy. It seems to be a different kind of thing happening in the Arab world where they have a holiday where they actually fast.
You fast, no food or water every day for 40 days, but you eat like after sundown.
After sundown, because Allah doesn't see at night, from what I understand. Maybe that's a joke. I don't know.
Yeah, we probably shouldn't quote that because we don't know a lot about it.
It's probably a myth. But there's probably a whole lot more to be done. I'm not a professional on Islam and the religious aspects of it, but what I do know is that the Arabs get very grumpy, to say the least, during this time.
Personally, I would think that it should be quieter during Ramadan because, like, when I don't eat or drink, I know that I don't feel like doing anything at all.
Right.
So, but for some reason, it seems like it sparks a lot of riots and protests and even terrorism.
Yeah.
And that's one reason. The other reason is that the Palestinian Authority is holding elections soon. And you're seeing a lot of protests regarding their elections as well.
But this is historical. During Ramadan, we have an uptick annually. Every year there's Ramadan, and it brings violence.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
Luke, you did some study today on violence in Jerusalem.
Yeah, they're seeing a lot of riots and protests in East Jerusalem. The deputy mayor of Jerusalem actually said it's worse than they've ever seen, worse than he's ever seen in East Jerusalem. The difference is that this year the crowds are a lot bigger. The number of people showing up for demonstrations are greater in number. And instead of like they call them lone wolf terrorist attacks. There's actually, you have mobs attacking people. It's like sometimes even hundreds of people attacking a single car or a single Jewish Israeli. And when we're talking about East Jerusalem, you're talking about a road that goes around the old city. That is how you get to the Mount of Olives, like a road that we travel on. Yeah. Even sometimes, if you want to go to the Mount of Olives, or even if you want to go to the Western Wall by car, like this is a way that you would go many times. And so this is where these riots are happening. There's actually, what's interesting in all of this is because the Arab shop owners in the old city, when like the Muslim quarter of the old city, they've had a really hard time, as all businesses have had over the last year because of the pandemic. They were looking forward to Ramadan because they were thinking a lot of tourism, a lot of shopping, and we'll do really well and kind of recover from the pandemic. Guess what happened? All these riots started happening, and all the business went away. Arab and Jewish, which, yes, they do both shop in the Arab quarter sometimes. And the Arab shop owners and other Arabs of East Jerusalem actually are going to the police and the deputy mayor of Jerusalem saying, please stop these riots. We need our business to come back. So, and yes, and then there's actually a story of a mob that attacked a Jewish car, and some Arabs saw it and rescued the guy. Which
Fantastic.
Is amazing.
Good for those Arabs.
Not only that, but you saw a story, or you looked at a story about some Jews that were attacked in Jaffa.
Well, you know, Luke, what you're talking about in East Jerusalem, it's understandable because lots of things happen there that we have. Those are not, many of them are not Israeli citizens. that are actually coming in and attacking Jews, and it's understandable. They have the Palestinian Arabs.
And when you say East Jerusalem, like it's automatically
it's a hot spot.
A conflict zone, I guess.
Conflict zone. What people don't understand is the lines. There really is no lines when it comes to, and we've talked about this before on the show. The Arab view of Israel, the Palestinian Arab view of Israel, is one map and it's one Palestinian state. No Jewish state in this country. It's kick the Jews into the sea, annihilate the Jews. Very Nazi mentality of the Jewish people, the Jewish problem. They've got this. It's terrible, and that's what they want to annihilate. They want to annihilate the Jews. The question I have, because there was a situation this week, and it's reoccurring, and there's big problems, not only inside of what people call the West Bank.
Right.
There's problems happening outside of the West Bank with not the Palestinian Arabs, but the Israeli Arabs, who actually, outside of a identification card, are actually very similar. And I don't know that people know that. In Jaffa, so you have Tel Aviv, Jaffa.
Which is the same city.
It's the same.
It's like not even a separate city.
No, it's the same.
Like I've been there.
Right on the coast.
You'd probably call it like a neighborhood of Tel Aviv.
So we're talking about Tel Aviv here, right there. Jews go to buy a apartment building for a new yeshiva, a Jewish learning, religious learning school place, and they get attacked by Arabs inside of Jaffa.
Israeli
Tel Aviv.
Arabs, no less.
Israeli Arabs. Okay, so they attack these Jews, and what do they tell the Jews? This is what is fascinating, and we got to highlight on the show so people understand this. They said, settlers, go home. What I want to tell everybody is that if the Israeli Arabs are saying the same things as the Palestinian Arabs, and they're saying the same thing as in settlers, go home. If the Jews are settlers in Tel Aviv, I don't think they're making any difference between the Jews that are living here in Har
It's the same
Bracha.
mentality as from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, right?
That's exactly their slogan.
Tel Aviv is from the river to the sea. So that they're saying basically no Jew belongs in the land of Israel. Everyone needs to go home, meaning somewhere else besides Israel.
Settlers go home. Settlers of Tel Aviv go home. Okay, that's what the Arab world's saying. So, ladies and gentlemen, there's no difference between the radical Islamic Israeli Arab and the radical Islamic Palestinian Arab. They're all dedicated to one thing, and that's to wipe Israel clean of the Jews.
Except for the ones that actually see a Jew being mobbed in a car and then go rescue them, which there are many of those as well.
We've had those stories happen a lot.
Right. So
thank God for those.
Yeah, the people that actually want peace.
But back to the bad side, we're going to get to some good stuff. We're going to talk about Abbas.
Yep. Mahmoud Abbas is the head of the Palestinian Authority. And by the way, something new I learned in the last couple of weeks. I kind of knew this, but the Palestinian Authority government is really just a part of the PLO, which is the Palestine Liberation Organization.
Right.
And the PA government was actually just an interim government that was supposed to operate for a few years after Oslo until a permanent Palestinian Council government could be formed, and that never actually happened. So when we talk about PA and PLO, they're actually same. There's not a difference between them. Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the PA, spoke to J Street, their yearly annual conferences this week, and he said that
by the way, Luke, don't even worry about looking up J Street.
No.
It's just a
liberal,
absolutely
leftist,
liberal garbage.
They're a Jewish organization, but they're completely anti-Israel. Yeah, anti-Zionist.
They do not represent the Jews, ladies and gentlemen. Just take that note.
So Abbas said to J Street that the Biden administration should rescind the 1987 U.S. determination that the Palestine Liberation Organization is a terror group. And he's saying that basically, so Biden is trying to restart talks with the Palestinians and kind of reform a relationship there, and he's already taken steps we can't even get into to do that. But now he's saying that the U.S. needs to rescind the law, and this under the State Department, like part of the PLO is on their designated terror watch list. Abbas is saying, this is hypocrisy at its greatest, that the PLO and Israel both recognize one another as legitimate representatives of both peoples under the 1993 Oslo Accords. First of all, that's not true. He's speaking in English, which, as you know, many Arab leaders, when they speak in English, they have a different story than when they speak in Arabic.
Right.
Because they signed an agreement under Oslo to fight terrorism together. I don't know about you, but when you're paying terrorists in prisons a salary of $3,000 a month, I don't think that's fighting terrorism together. But the big thing that would have to stop for the U.S. to rescind this law is for the PA to stop paying terrorists. And it's actually, there's reports that the PA is prepared to alter the way it pays stipends to Palestinian security prisoners as well as their families of terrorists and others killed by Israelis in an effort to convince Biden to scrap the law. One way they were thinking about doing that is that they're thinking maybe the stipends to terrorists or prisoners could be based on their financial needs instead of current set protocols. And the way it works right now is the more Jews you kill, the bigger of a salary you get. The more years you spend in Israeli prison, the larger your salary is. So instead of that, maybe the PA could say, what are your financial needs? And then that would like satisfy the United States that
Luke,
they're not supporting
the
terrorism.
only thing that really worries me is that Biden would actually enter into a conversation with this, because as we see with what we're about to talk about with Iran,
Definitely happen.
We have major concerns that this is actually will go through. And this is very scary for Israel. Not only we're about to disclose with Iran and the conversation happening with America, but also we have the whole situation on the ground here with the PLO, same difference. Biden in this talks is a bit, I would say, you would be scared if you didn't believe in God, but we know that there's a bigger story going on here. And that even though the leftists and may get a foothold, hey, we'll come back. Things will be made right.
Mm-hmm. So last week we talked about the 150 kilogram bomb that blew up the power lines and the backup power system at the Natanz nuclear facility in Iran. Iran has named a suspect now. They're blaming it on Israel. And although Israel is not saying anything, like pretty much, I'm trying to think if I've seen anybody say that they don't believe it's Israel, like Israelis included. So most people think that Israel's behind the attack, which some people are saying that Israel and Iran are now in what would be called like a shadow war, meaning they don't want to directly confront each other in a war or an attack, but they're working behind the scenes to sabotage each other as much as possible. Iran trying to sabotage Israeli ships and things like that.
Right. Well, the whole oil spill that we had here, I mean, we've got that stuff kind of happening. The whole beaches were filled with oil for a couple weeks.
But the big worry right now is that the United States is going to try and re-enter the 2015 JCPOA deal, right? And that's what Israel is very worried about. President Trump withdrew the U.S. from the deal, which probably majorly slowed down Iran from enriching enough uranium to pursue a nuclear weapon. So they probably would have had it several years ago if he hadn't done that. Interesting. Under the 2015 deal, Iran was allowed to enrich up to 3.67% uranium, right?
Right.
Just this week, Iran has announced that they're now enriching uranium up to 60% purity. Now, because of the attack that damaged the facility last week, I think they can only enrich it in very small quantities.
Right.
So they're moving a lot slower. Some people say it could take them 6 to 9 months to recover from that attack to get back up to regular speed. But they're enriching at 60%, which is just barely away from being able to build a nuclear or weapons grade uranium. I think they have to hit 90%. That's not very far away, and way beyond the less than 4% that they were allowed under the 2015 deal.
So just over the 2015, we had the JCPOA, and that was monitoring to not go over 3.67.
Correct.
You're saying they're at 60 right now.
Now they're at 60.
So that means that it really does not take much time to get to 90.
Right. No, yeah. I mean, what is that, 10 times? It's just mind-blowing to me that the United States is in talks to try and bring Iran back to this deal when they've gone so far over the red line. Right. And here's the problem. Israelis are worried that the U.S. is going to just re-enter this deal with no preconditions whatsoever. Now, Biden originally said that Iran would have to come back within the requirements of the 2015 deal as a precondition. But now there's a lot of speculation that they might just forego that. Now, here's the thing. Iran's precondition is that the United States lift all economic sanctions before they return to the deal. And the U.S., on the other hand, wants Iran to return to the terms of the deal before they lift economic sanctions. So you have a stalemate here. And the concern is that the U.S. will just come back into the deal as a goodwill gesture so that Iran might actually come back, would actually come back to the terms of the deal again and stop enriching uranium at 60%. Not likely to happen whatsoever. Israeli officials on Sunday night this week expressed concern that the Biden administration will rush to rejoin the deal. An anonymous Israeli official said both sides, the Americans and the Iranians, want a deal. The Iranians smell that the Americans want an agreement at any price. Danger of Middle Eastern powers negotiating with a Western powers because it's two totally different mindsets and cultures. Quote, again, the outcome is known from the start. A return to the Iran deal with amendments. The official also said in the long term, it will restrict Israel's freedom of movement, and it's very troubling. Another senior Israeli official told Axios they feared a deal could come very soon. Quote, "We will not be surprised if within weeks the U.S. and other world powers sign a deal with Iran, and Mossad and Israel's other intelligence agencies are predicting just that they will return to the deal." And right now, the United States is trying to bring Iran into talks, being mediated by Europe in Vienna. So it's not something that's far-fetched whatsoever. Interesting thing is, we don't have time to get into it on the show, is that there's a huge uprising from people in Iran and ex-Iranians that I guess are living outside of the country because they're afraid for their life and not even going to jail, but like afraid of being killed. There's a huge movement. There's like prominent ex-government officials, celebrities, singers, artists, like everybody. They've signed, more than 600 people have signed this anti-Islamic regime declaration, and they're now calling for a democratic republic in Iran. So obviously it's hugely risky to attempt something like that. But there is, like, Iran does have their own problems.
Well, I think you have the inner core here, Luke, that's being very problematic and very almost like the old way of thinking. You have a westernization that's taken place inside the Arab countries that is very real, and it's representing a lot of the young people who are truly being this part of the country that are making a bit of a changing patterns. They're moving off from the old take over the world kind of mentality. It seems like we're having a little bit of move with that. And honestly, it can be seen even in the birth rates. Just a fascinating article throughout the Arab world, Western worlds, where you find a lessening of the birth rate. And Iran is actually one of the least amount in the entire Arab world, only like 1.9%, or 1.9 percent for
per family.
Per family. So that's incredibly low for the Arab world.
And that's just changed since if you even here, like even amongst the Palestinians. So I'm guessing that's true for most of the Arab world. That's just since the 1980s, like in the last 30, 40 years.
So you have an extreme change that's actually representing westernization that's happening all over these areas. Israel, on the other hand, is growing. Israel is like 3 points, something like that.
Come here to the heartland, it's even higher.
It's even higher, way higher.
And just to be clear, before we get off the Iran topic, Iran's goal is to annihilate Israel and the United States. And I don't know for the life of me why the United States is trying to negotiate with someone who wants to kill them and their greatest ally in the Middle East. The commander-in-chief of Iran's Revolutionary Guards just this week said that Israel would very soon disappear, talking about their plans to defeat the Zionist regime. And he said, actually, quote, "We tell the Zionists that your happiness is very fleeting. You will disappear at the hands of the nation you expelled from their land." I don't know why we're trying to negotiate with people like this.
Right. Well, I don't think Israel obviously
enemy says they're going to kill you, you should believe them.
Just listen. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I could. Israel's obviously not negotiating. They're the ones blowing up things. But America is the one at the background that I don't see any. There's no common sense in it
It's
at all.
a problem for Israel because America is their greatest friend and ally, right? So they have this very delicate tightrope to walk when dealing with Iran.
Luke, when I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking about anti-Semitism at its greatest fulfillment. Like it's anti-Semitism in full swing. It's hatred of the Jews in full motion. That's what we're really discussing on the show today. We're talking about the nations of the world, the peoples, the demographics. I just looking at here, the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, actually posted that the Middle Eastern country with the lowest anti-Semitic index score is actually, believe it or not, Iran. Okay, so Iran.
Lowest.
Okay, the lowest, and now I have to say what that.
Okay,
so it's
please
50,
explain yourself.
It's 56%.
Okay.
What my point is that they're talking like this. They're committed to the death, destruction of Zionism, Jewish people, state of Israel, and they're the lowest level of hatred of Jews.
Right.
Okay, so what are these other countries? They're harboring massive amounts of Jew hatred. There was the ADL did a global report on the Jew hatred in the world, and they took out of 4.1 billion people, they took the stats, and just over a quarter of people in the world, 1.09 billion people in the world, harbor anti-Semitic attitudes towards the people of Israel.
Crazy.
When you're dealing with anti-Semitic views on such an incredibly large level, just to break it down, we've got 24% of the Christian world harboring these views. They broke it down into, they got 49% of the Muslim world They said that's the collective overall.
Right.
The Muslims straight around Israel here, it's more like 75% on an average. You've got the Hindus 19%, the Buddhists 17%, atheists and none 21%. So literally, you have this huge demographic of people that just absolutely hate Israel. I would say right now, Iran is just the arm of that. Mm-hmm. They're the ones that are dedicated to the annihilation of Israel in action. Right. And all these other people are just cheering on Facebook and wherever else they can get a comment or two in their countries. And we're seeing it. I was just on the ADL website. We're seeing anti-Semitic acts kick up all over the world. It's not something that's going away. It's something that we need to stand up and fight against at whatever cost we can. There's just another example of it just in Holland. There's a Dutch Christian organization, Christians for Israel. It's a wonderful organization. They're dedicated to bringing Israel, educating people about Israel, bringing Israel to people. They bring products. Specifically, they're very Zionist. They're pro-Israel to the max. The story of the founder, when he was younger, he used to go and find products from Israel all throughout. It was like a game he would play with his dad, going out to the stores, and he would find products in Holland that were made by Israel, and they would buy it. When they'd go to a store, they would ask for if there was anything made by Israel. Guys, that's exactly the opposite of what we're seeing today. We're seeing an anti-Israel agenda that's pushed. We're seeing BDS, boycott Israel products, not people going up and asking, where's the Israeli products, right? And so this is what the Christians for Israel, he dedicated his whole life to creating a place to bring Israeli products to countries of the world. They just got slapped with a big fine because of their Zionist leanings. They would not take off of their a label for wine. They said on the label it said a product from an Israeli village in Judea and Samaria. Well, according to the Holland officials, the food product center in Amsterdam, they said that you're not allowed to put that title on. You have to say Israeli settlements. You cannot say Israeli village. You have to say settlements of the West Bank.
What's interesting to me is they didn't even say product of Israel. They said product from an Israeli village in Judea and Samaria. Now, regardless of whether or not you want to call it the West Bank or call it Judea and Samaria, like, you can't deny that it is actually Judea and Samaria, south of Jerusalem's Judea, north of Jerusalem, Samaria. And that, those terms go back 3,000 years through the Bible, right? So you can't deny that. And you also can't deny that these settlements, the Jewish settlements here, are Israeli. So what problem can you have with product from an Israeli village in Judea and Samaria? Right. But no, it has to be called product from the West Bank.
Or a $2,500 fine.
And I'm guessing they proudly paid that fine.
And they did, and I don't think
thank you, Holland. Way to go, Christians Holland. For Israel, standing in the Netherlands.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Products from Judea and Samaria.
So in a way, it's sad.
You have our support.
You definitely have our support, and I think there's millions of people around the world. And those of you who listen to the show, hey, go ring them up and tell them you're proud of them. That's right. Especially Holland. Those good guys.
Josh, I wanted to highlight one more thing because this debunks another huge myth. And that is, there's a story this week that a complex surgery at Israel's Rambam hospital saved a 7-year-old boy, which is an awesome story to hear anytime, right?
Right.
But guess where this boy was from? This boy that they saved his life, I think, in this complicated surgery, was from the Gaza Strip. A complex, highly sophisticated medical operation recently performed at the Rambam Healthcare Campus in Haifa saved the life of Madhat Tapash, a 7-year-old boy from the Gaza Strip. For the past 2.5 years, he's been undergoing dialysis treatment because of his severe medical condition. He was unable to receive the care he needed through the Palestinian Authority's healthcare system, was transferred to Rambam by the health coordinator for patients from the PA in Israel. Was glad to save his life. And that, I would tell that story because it's not the only one.
Yeah.
Israel is the good Samaritan, really, the good Jew. They're bringing that. They're not the. This is not the only story of people being brought from the Gaza Strip. Even Palestinian officials, I think that they brought him to a Jerusalem hospital, right? Yeah. Israel is willing to go to great lengths to save their neighbors and their cousins' lives and take care of them in their own hospitals, no matter what their enemies are, what they say about them, or how they feel about them. So I just think it's just an amazing example.
There's no other
Israel being the good neighbor here.
There's no greater enemy to Israel than close by than Hamas, Iran, the militias at hand. But yet, even in these situations, Israel steps out to help when there's a need, and Israel helps on a global level. Any disaster, Israel's nearly the first one on the scene
in
all
other
the time.
countries.
Luke, there's good news. We talked about a lot of bad things about Arab nations. People out there, don't worry. We love Arab peoples. These Arab nations and agendas are bad, but I've got something good to say about some Arabs. You ready for this? We can't just down it all the time. Here we go. There's some good
news.
Good things that Arabs do out there.
Second good news story.
Good news from the Sudan. Sudan officially annuls 63 years of Israel boycott. They
63 years.
Yeah,
wow.
yeah. They had a
That's
law boycott
almost going back
Israel.
to Israel's founding.
Right. The removal of 1958 legislation barring ties with Jewish state approved a joint vote of ruling sovereignty council and cabinet. So they've completely done away with this. There was major issues, and rightfully so. There was terrorism. There was a lot of stuff that Sudan was on bad list for a long time.
And
doing
by the
bad
way,
things.
I just want to point out, Holland, the Netherlands, boycotting Israeli products from Judea and Samaria. Sudan,
It's
of
lifting
all
the bar.
countries, lifting a 63-year-old boycott law. So way to go, Sudan. Netherlands, get your act together. Time to support Israel.
And lastly, the greatest news of all, there is new communities being built in Israel, in the Gush Etzion region. The community of Ibei Nachal, there's 96 more units being built up, and I'll quote from the governor down in that region. He says, "We can now envision the tractors working in the fields towards the construction of 96 units, which is a true Zionist endeavor to strengthen Judea and Samaria. Here at the edge of the desert, we expand our building and strengthen our presence in Gush Etzion." We say hats off to the folks of Gush Etzion and the Judea area for building up the land of Israel. You couldn't do anything
Still
better.
happening. So way to go. Positive things are happening here in the land of Israel. By the way, our next adventure show is coming out next week on, I believe, April 28th. So stay tuned for that. Mark your calendars. Next week's show will be our next adventure show. We went into an Israeli settlement and outpost. So super excited about that. Yeah. Stay tuned. You're going to want to find out all about it. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel, subscribe on the podcast platform wherever you listen. In the meantime, be strong, be courageous, and be the voice of Joshua and Caleb in your generation.
I believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Hi guys, if you enjoyed the show, make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel. We also have tons more incredible content straight from Israel's heartland, which you can find completely free at joshuaandcaleb.com. If you're interested in signing up for a life-changing volunteer program in Israel's heartland, you can go to serveisrael.com. We host Christians from all over the world to help plant trees, harvest grapes, prune vines, and basically help farmers all over Judea and Samaria, all while experiencing the land and people of Israel in a way that you're never going to get on a 10-day tour. Just go to serveisrael.com to find out more information.